"Don't feed her. She's not paying." Preston Vance said it loud enough for the whole diner to hear. And for one cold second, every fork stopped halfway to every mouth. Snow pressed against the windows of Whitmore's kitchen on the edge of Millbrook, Vermont, turning the parking lot lights into soft white halos. The place smelled of scorched coffee, onions on the flat top, and old vinyl booths wiped down too many times to count. In the back booth sat a woman in a thin brown coat, her hair frosted with melting snow, her hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold an hour ago. She'd given the waitress a name that wasn't hers, Margaret Doyle, when she'd asked if she could just sit a while, maybe get something small, and pay next time she came through. The waitress had looked at her boots first, then her coat, then the empty mug. "This isn't a warming shelter, ma'am." A man in a gray sport coat smirked into his newspaper. A woman 2 booths down pulled her handbag onto her lap. Margaret dropped her eyes to the table, and that's when Daniel Reyes walked in with $11 in his pocket, a bag of children's cough medicine under one arm, and the particular tiredness of a father who'd already spent his whole day being strong for someone else. He didn't look like anyone's idea of a hero. His work coat had a tear at the shoulder seam, mended with the wrong color thread. His boots were cracked at the toe. His face had the flat, patient exhaustion of a man running on double shifts and short sleep. At home, his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, was waiting in their apartment above a closed-up laundromat, probably drawing pictures of a house with smoke curling out of the chimney, the way she did when she wanted things to feel warm even when they weren't. He'd promised her dinner, grilled cheese, split 2 ways, and if there was enough left over, tomato soup from the dented can in the cupboard. It was supposed to get them to Friday. He ordered a bowl of chicken and rice soup and a roll at the counter, paid in crumpled ones, and change he'd counted twice in the truck. And that's when he heard Preston's voice again. "Get her out of here!" Margaret rose slowly, her face going red with shame rather than anger. "I'm sorry," she said. "I just needed to get warm." "Get warm outside," Preston answered, and 2 people laughed. The man in the sport coat and a young shift lead hovering near the register who wanted Preston to notice him. Daniel turned with his tray in his hands. Steam rose off the soup. The roll sat warm in its paper sleeve. He looked at Margaret, then at the door, where wind was driving snow sideways past the streetlight. He took the kind of breath a man takes when he already knows the right thing is going to cost him. Then he crossed the room and set the tray down in front of her. "She's eating with me tonight," Daniel said. Preston looked him over, unimpressed. "And you are?" "Just a guy sharing his dinner." "With whose money?" someone muttered. Daniel heard it. Margaret heard it. He didn't answer. He only tore the roll in half, wrapped one piece in a napkin, and slid it into his coat pocket, for Lily, for later. "Eat while it's hot," he told Margaret. She looked at him like he'd handed her something much heavier than soup. "If you're enjoying this one, drop where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe people deserve a second look before they're judged, go ahead and hit subscribe." Now, back to the diner, because nobody in that room knew the woman they'd just humiliated was Claire Whitmore, the CEO of the company that owned the building, the sign out front, and every policy that had just been used against her. Daniel didn't know her real name, and that ignorance mattered more than anyone in the room understood. If he'd known she was Claire Whitmore, that her signature could move budgets and end careers before lunch, the gesture might have looked smaller, calculated even. But he knew nothing except that a stranger was cold, hungry, and being made to feel like a problem. So he stood there, empty-handed, his daughter's bread folded against his ribs, while Preston Vance looked at him like poverty were a smell that might spread. "You think this makes you a good guy?" Preston asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. Wind rattled the window glass. Somewhere in the kitchen, a pot lid clattered against the sink. "No," he finally said. "I think it makes her warm for 10 minutes. A few heads dropped, not because Daniel had shamed anyone out loud, but because he'd refused to. That was always his way. He carried hard things the way a man carries a couch up a narrow staircase alone. Slow, careful, without asking for anyone to notice. Daniel Reyes hadn't planned on becoming the kind of father who checked the mailbox with dread and called breakfast for dinner a special treat. 9 years earlier, he'd worked line install for a regional cable company, brought home steady pay, came home every night to a rented house with a porch swing and noise in the kitchen. Then his wife, Marisol, got sick. Then the medical bills stacked up faster than the overtime could cover. Then the house went. Then Marisol was gone, and Daniel was left with Lily, a shoebox of photographs, and a promise made in a hospital hallway: keep her safe, keep her soft-hearted, and never let this world convince her that love has a price tag. Since then, every day had been a quiet negotiation with just enough. He worked nights stocking shelves at a distribution center off Route 9, then picked up weekend handyman jobs, a leaky faucet here, a busted porch step there, whatever paid $30 or $40 cash. Still, the apartment stayed cold by the windows, and the refrigerator hummed on mostly empty. What scared Daniel most wasn't hunger. He'd gotten quietly good at hunger. Lily rarely noticed. What scared him was the county letter sitting on his kitchen table, the one that said his custody status would be reviewed unless he could show steady income, safe housing, consistent meals. Steady, safe, consistent. Words built for people with a second income, not a father patching his daughter's coat with thread from an old flannel shirt. That evening, Lily had stood at the window in her socks, holding up a drawing of the two of them at a table piled with food. "Daddy," she'd asked, "when you get paid, can we get the soup with the star noodles?" Daniel had smiled, like the question hadn't landed somewhere tender. "We'll do even better than that," he told her. "Maybe grilled cheese, too." She'd beamed like he'd promised her the moon. That was why the diner stop mattered. It wasn't just soup, it was proof he could still bring something home whole. And yet, under those buzzing lights, watching Margaret lift the spoon with a shaking hand, Daniel felt no regret. Just a quiet ache, and beneath it, something like peace. Because a man with almost nothing still gets to choose. He can hoard the little he has until it turns to stone in his chest, or he can give a piece of it away and remember he's still a person. Across the table, Margaret took one small spoonful, and her eyes filled with something she tried to blink away. Daniel looked toward the window to give her room. Preston saw only a poor man wasting a meal on a poorer woman, but Margaret saw the folded napkin disappearing into Daniel's coat pocket, the careful way he'd saved half a roll for someone he loved, and for the first time all day, the most powerful woman in that diner felt something close to shame. Margaret dipped her spoon again, but her mind had already left the diner. It had gone back to a glass tower in Burlington that morning, 30 floors above the street, where people hurried past with paper cups and clean shoes, and nobody looked hungry unless hunger had been turned into a slide. At 8:15 that morning, Claire Whitmore had sat at the head of a long table while Preston Vance clicked through a deck full of smiling families and words like community and access. The numbers were clean: food costs down, labor down, satisfaction scores up. Preston stood beside the screen in a charcoal suit, voice smooth as poured syrup. "The regional program is running leaner than ever," he said. "More efficient, more profitable." Claire watched the slide change to a photo of a boy holding a bowl of soup under the Whitmore's logo, and something in her went still. "What happened to the neighborhood meal program?" "Reallocated," Preston said, without blinking. "That's not what I asked. It was underused, costly. People took advantage of it." 3 answers, clean and rehearsed. 2 board members nodded along. An assistant kept typing like ethics could be filed under bullet points. Claire looked at the photo again. She recognized that campaign. She'd approved it herself, 6 years back, when her father was still alive, and the company still believed a restaurant owed the world something past a receipt. Her father used to say a plate of food was never just food, it was a welcome mat. After he died, the company had grown faster than her grief could keep pace with, and men like Preston had learned to wrap cold math in warm language. Then the envelope arrived. No return address, hand-delivered by building security. Inside, a printed complaint from a former warehouse employee, photos of sealed trays of untouched food dumped behind a store, and a note in blue ink. "They're using your name to turn hungry people away." Below it, one more line. "Ask about Millbrook." Claire read it 3 times. "Who sent this?" she asked her chief of staff. "We don't know yet. Does Preston know?" "Not unless you tell him." So she didn't. Instead, she cleared her afternoon, left her phone and her driver behind, and bought a thin brown coat from a resale shop 2 blocks over. She took $40 in small bills, a bus pass, and the name Margaret Doyle, plain enough to vanish inside. All day she'd walked into places carrying her family's name on the sign. At one, a cashier told her the restroom was for paying customers. At another, a manager asked her to move along before the lunch rush. At a grocery store her company owned, a security guard trailed her down the bread aisle until she stepped back out into the cold. Nobody had shouted. That was the part that stayed with her. Cruelty rarely announces itself. It comes wrapped in a smile that doesn't reach the eyes, in a policy recited without a flicker of mercy, in a door held open only long enough to usher someone out of it. By the time she reached Millbrook, the snow had soaked through her shoes and her composure had worn thinner than the coat on her back. She'd wanted proof. Now proof was sitting across from her in the shape of a tired man who'd given away the only meal he'd paid for. Preston stepped closer, his shoes stopping just short of the puddle melting off Margaret's coat. "You're making everyone uncomfortable," he said. Daniel looked around the room, the lowered eyes, the half-eaten plates, the phones angled his way. "No," he said. "Being hungry makes people uncomfortable. I'm just setting a bowl down in front of it." The words weren't loud, but they carried. Margaret kept both hands around the spoon, afraid that if she moved too fast, the fragile mercy on the table might break. The soup was simple: chicken, rice, a little pepper. But to her, it tasted older than comfort. It tasted like being seen without having to earn it. "You do this a lot?" she asked quietly. "Do what?" "Give away your dinner." He gave a tired half-smile. "Only when someone needs it worse than me." "And do you need it?" Daniel looked toward the window, where snow blew sideways under the street lamp. He could have lied easily. Men like him got good at lying kindly. "I already ate. I've got food at home. I'm fine." But something in her eyes asked for the truth without demanding it. "I've got a little girl waiting on me," he said. "Her name's Lily." Margaret set the spoon down. "Then you should take this back." "No, please, eat." 4 small words. No speech, no performance. Just a line drawn in quiet dignity. Daniel touched the folded roll through his coat pocket. He'd tucked it away before she could see, but she'd noticed everything by now. The napkin had a green crayon sun drawn on one corner and the letter L written slightly backward beside it. "She drew that?" Daniel looked surprised, then soft. "This morning, she puts little pictures on things she wants me to remember." "What did she want you to remember today?" He rubbed his thumb over the fold. "To come home." Margaret's throat tightened. All day she'd been turned away by people trained to measure worth at a register. Now a man with a torn coat and a custody letter waiting on his kitchen table was guarding half a bread roll like treasure. Preston crossed his arms. "This is sentimental nonsense. Sir, I'm asking you one more time to leave." Daniel turned to face him fully. "And I'm asking you one more time to let her finish eating." The waitress froze near the coffee station. The shift lead stopped smiling. Even the man in the sport coat lowered his phone, not because Daniel sounded threatening. He didn't. His voice stayed level, almost gentle. But there are moments when calm outweighs anger, when respect stands so still that disrespect has nowhere left to hide. Preston's eyes narrowed. "Reyes," he said slowly. "Daniel Reyes. You work the overnight dock at the Route 9 warehouse." Daniel didn't move. "You're the one who filed that complaint. Claimed we were tossing good food in the dumpster." "It wasn't a claim," Daniel said. "It was food. 3 words. Plain and heavy. You know what I think?" Preston went on, lowering his voice just enough to sound personal while making sure the whole room still heard. "I think guys like you love a cause because it distracts from your own mess. Can't fix your life, so you point at everyone else's." Daniel's hands stayed loose at his sides. He didn't list his shifts, his bills, the nights he went cold so Lily could stay warm. Sometimes dignity means letting an insult stand there naked and ashamed of itself. But Preston wasn't finished. "Is this how you feed your daughter? Giving strangers your dinner so people can clap for you?" Something crossed Daniel's face and was gone. "Leave her out of this." "Why? She's part of the story, isn't she? Struggling dad, sad kid, a heroic bowl of soup. Almost touching." The room shifted, no longer amused. The waitress studied the floor. The shift lead swallowed hard. "I don't need anyone's pity," Daniel said, low and clear. "But she needed to eat." Preston laughed shortly. "There it is." Then, with a careless flick of his wrist, he knocked the edge of the tray. the bowl tipped. Soup spread across the table, onto the tile, over the toe of Daniel's boot. Nobody laughed this time. It was a small sound, ceramic against wood, liquid spreading, a spoon spinning once before it stilled. But it felt like the loudest thing in the building. Daniel looked at the mess on the floor, then at Margaret, whose eyes had gone bright with anger. He knelt, picked the spoon up, and set it gently back on the table. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. "What are you going to do about it?" Daniel pulled a stack of napkins from the dispenser and started wiping the floor himself, slow and careful. Not because Preston deserved it. Because Lily had once asked why people should clean up messes they didn't make, and he'd told her, because the world gets better when somebody decides to make it better. Margaret watched him kneel beside the ruined meal, guarding everyone's dignity but his own, and understood the truth more clearly than any report could have shown her. Preston Vance hadn't just spilled soup. He'd exposed exactly what the company had become under his watch. Someone had already posted a video by the time the door swung shut behind them. It didn't show Daniel offering his meal. It didn't show Preston mocking his daughter or knocking the bowl aside. It opened with Daniel standing over the spill, Preston's voice sounding calm and reasonable, and a caption written to make the world cruel in a different direction. "Warehouse worker causes scene at Whitmore's." By morning, it had traveled from Millbrook to Burlington and beyond. People who'd never gone hungry decided what hunger should look like. People who'd never read a custody letter decided what kind of father Daniel must be. At 6:10 a.m., his supervisor called. "Daniel, I have to suspend you. Pending review. You saw the video? HR saw it. There's more to it than that." A pause. "I believe you, but belief isn't paperwork." Daniel sat at his kitchen table in the gray half-light, still in yesterday's clothes, boots drying by the radiator. Across the room, Lily slept on the couch under a thin quilt because the bedroom window let in too much cold. Her drawing from the night before sat beside the county envelope. A house, a long table, 2 bowls of soup, a green sun over the door. At 8:32, Ms. Alvarez from County Family Services called. Careful voice, practiced kindness. "Mr. Reyes, we've received information about an incident connected to your workplace. Given the pending review, we'll need updated proof of income and household stability." Daniel looked at the empty fridge, the overdue heating bill, the bread wrapped in his daughter's napkin. "How long do I have?" "Not long," she said gently. Lily appeared in the hallway, barefoot, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy?" She'd seen the envelope. "Kids always see what you try to hide. Are they going to take me away?" The question broke the room into pieces. Daniel crossed to her, knelt so their eyes were level, and pulled her in close, because he couldn't promise never and wouldn't lie to her either. Somewhere far above the city, Claire Whitmore was about to watch the full video. Claire watched the edited clip once, then again, then a third time with the sound off, because lies often show themselves more clearly in silence. She was back in her office before sunrise, still in the brown coat over her blouse, hair damp at the ends, shoes stained from the snow. Her chief of staff, Renata Cho, stood by with a tablet and worry on her face. "It's spreading fast. Preston's office is already calling it a safety incident." "Get me the store cameras," Claire said. "Every angle, dining room, counter, kitchen door, parking lot, audio if they have it." Preston will ask why. Let him. 3 hours later, the truth arrived in separate files, each time-stamped, each colder than the last. Claire watched Margaret Doyle, hunched in the corner booth, watched the waitress refuse her coffee, watched Preston step in, clean suit and cleaner cruelty, watched Daniel walk in, count his coins at the register, set his tray down in front of a stranger with no flourish at all, just mercy, placed on a table. The next angle showed what the public clip had cut. Preston bringing up Daniel's daughter, the tray knocked sideways, the soup spreading across the tile, Daniel kneeling, not to argue, not to shame anyone, just to clean up a mess he hadn't made. Claire pressed a hand to her mouth. She'd seen corporate rot before, men who buried complaints and polished ugliness until it passed for strategy. This was different. This was the exact moment a company misplaced its soul over a bowl of soup. Then the parking lot camera. Daniel walking Margaret to the bus stop under a broken awning, snow coming down sideways through the streetlight. He shrugged off his own coat and put it around her shoulders, though he was already shivering. He waited until the bus came, stepped back to give her room to board, asking for nothing, not even her name. When she was gone, he stood alone and pulled the napkin from his pocket, checking on the bread inside, like it still mattered, like love could survive the walk home, even after a night like that. The green crayon sun flashed on screen for less than 2 seconds. Claire paused it there and stared until it blurred. "Find him," she said. "Daniel Reyes? For legal? For justice." By noon, she had his personnel file. His complaint, ignored 6 weeks earlier. His request for emergency scheduling flexibility, denied by Preston, with the note, "low priority." Claire read that phrase twice. Low priority. A widowed father trying to keep his daughter fed, called low priority by a company built on feeding families. By 3 that afternoon, the boardroom at Whitmore Foods was full of people who thought the meeting was about protecting the brand. Preston sat near the front, tie perfectly centered, a legal folder open in front of him, wearing the calm of a man who'd rehearsed his innocence in a mirror. Around him sat directors, PR staff, 2 attorneys who'd already drafted a statement calling Daniel's behavior unfortunate and inconsistent with our values. Claire entered last. No tailored suit, no jewelry, no armor. Just the same thin brown coat, cuffs still damp, hem stained from the snow. Conversation died at once. "Evelyn, Claire," Preston caught himself, half rising. "We were just reviewing the incident. We have a strategy." "No," she said. "You have a cover story. Sit down." She set a remote on the table and turned to the screen. The public clip played first. Daniel by the spilled soup. Preston composed. The caption blaming the wrong man. "As you can see," Preston said, "he caused a disturbance." She clicked again. The room saw Margaret alone in the booth, the waitress turning her away, and heard Preston's voice. "Don't feed her. She's not paying." A few faces changed. Not much, just a tightened jaw, a lowered chin, the quiet discomfort of people recognizing truth before they're ready to name it. She clicked again. Daniel entering, counting his coins, setting the tray down. "She's eating with me tonight." Preston leaned forward. "That angle doesn't show the full context." "Then let's keep watching," Claire said. The next clip, Preston mocking Daniel's job, bringing up his daughter, calling his kindness sentimental nonsense. Then the tray tipping, the soup spilling, Daniel kneeling with napkins instead of raising his voice. The boardroom went so quiet, the air vents sounded like wind across an empty field. An attorney closed his folder. A PR officer turned her draft statement face down on the table. "He filed false complaints," Preston said, cracking now. "Accused us of wasting good food." Claire clicked once more. Photographs, sealed trays behind a store, bread marked for the dumpster, internal emails carrying Preston's approval, and a scanned copy of Daniel's complaint, dated 6 weeks earlier, respectful and detailed and ignored. "Mr. Reyes told the truth," Claire said, "before any of us were brave enough to hear it." Preston stood fully. "This company can't be run on emotion." Claire turned to face him, and the thin brown coat looked less like a disguise now and more like evidence. "This company sells food," she said. "If hunger doesn't move us, we have no business being in this business." She placed a printed page on the table. "Preston Vance, effective immediately. Your employment is terminated. Legal will review every complaint filed under your supervision." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Claire faced the room. "The ad campaign is canceled. That budget goes to a permanent community meal program at every Whitmore's location. Not for photographs, for people." She paused, her voice softening only slightly. "And Daniel Reyes will have a public apology before sunset." On the screen behind her, the final frame stayed paused. Daniel's hand around a folded napkin, a small green sun drawn in the corner. Nobody in that room called him poor again. The apology reached Daniel's phone at 4:47, but he didn't see it right away. He was on the edge of Lily's bed, taping plastic sheeting over the drafty window, calling it a project instead of a problem. The apartment smelled like toast and laundry soap, and faintly of the soup he'd never gotten to bring home. Lily had been quiet all day, the kind of quiet kids use when they're trying not to worry a parent who's already worried enough. 3 soft knocks came at the door. Daniel opened it expecting Ms. Alvarez or another envelope asking him to prove he was enough. Instead, Claire Whitmore stood in the hallway. No coat this time, no disguise, no cameras behind her, just a woman holding a covered dish in both hands and something like shame in her eyes. Daniel stared. Recognition arrived slowly, then all at once. Margaret? She shook her head. Claire. Claire Whitmore. Behind him, Lily peeked around the kitchen doorway. Claire looked at her and smiled with such gentleness that Daniel's guard slipped a little. I owe you both the truth, she said. He didn't invite her in right away. A man who's been humiliated learns to be careful when the world comes back holding gifts. Is this pity? No, Claire said, steady, despite the tears in her eyes. This is justice, running late. She handed him a folder, a formal apology, his suspension lifted, back pay approved, his old complaint reopened, and a new position offered. Regional Community Meals Coordinator, steady hours, real benefits, enough to make the county stop treating poverty like a character flaw. Daniel read the first page, then the second, and his hands stilled on the third. The part naming him to lead a program feeding families across the whole region. I didn't ask for this. I know, Claire said. That's why it matters. Lily stepped forward, holding out half a cookie wrapped in a napkin. Are you the lady Daddy gave his soup to? Claire knelt to meet her eyes. I am, sweetheart. Lily studied her a moment, then held the cookie out further. We share things here. Something in Claire came undone that no boardroom had ever managed to touch. She took the cookie with both hands like it was something rare. Daniel looked away, not to hide anything, just to give her room inside her own gratitude. 6 months later, every Whitmore's kitchen in Vermont had one small table by the front window with a plain sign, reserved for anyone who's hungry. No purchase necessary, no explanation required. At the Millbrook location, beside that sign, hung a framed napkin with a green crayon sun and a backward letter L. Daniel never much cared for speeches, so he didn't give one. He showed up every morning, checked the kitchen stock, learned every staff member's name, and made sure no child, no tired stranger in a wet coat was ever made to feel small for being hungry. Preston Vance's name disappeared from the company directory. But it was Daniel's quiet, stubborn decency that changed how the whole company measured success. Not just in profit, but in warm bowls served, and doors kept open, and people allowed to sit down before they had to prove they belonged there. And Claire Whitmore, who'd once put on a thin brown coat to go looking for the truth, found something better than truth that night. She found a man with almost nothing who still gave like his heart had never once run short. If this one got you, tell us in the comments what you'd have done in Daniel's place, and whether you think one quiet act of kindness can still turn a whole room around. Thanks for sticking with the story until the end.